My name is Wanda Jean Kowalski, and I was born in the middle of a February blizzard in 1959 in a farmhouse outside of Sudbury, Ontario, delivered by my aunt because the roads were too bad for anyone to get through. My mother always said I came into this world stubborn and inconvenient, and maybe she was right. I never did like making things easy. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North. Night shifts, double shifts, Christmas shifts, the kind of work that hollows you out and fills you back up with something harder than what you had before. When my husband Ray died of a heart attack in 2019, I was 60 years old, standing in our kitchen in my work scrubs when the call came. I didn't cry right away. I just sat down on the linoleum floor and stayed there for a while. Ray had built that house himself in 1987, every wall, every door frame. I still live in it. I don't think I'll ever leave. We had one son, because that's what he is, even now, even after everything. He was born in 1986, the year the Leafs broke my father's heart for what he swore was the final time. My son grew up in this house, learned to skate on the pond behind the property, drove our old Silverado into a ditch exactly once, and never spoke of it again. He's 40 now, works in tech, something with servers and infrastructure that I've never fully understood, but he earns good money. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, comes from a family in Oakville. Old money, the quiet kind that doesn't advertise itself but shows up in the way people hold a room. They got married in 2017 before Ray passed. It was a beautiful wedding. I wore a blue dress and I danced with Ray, and I thought, well, we did all right. We raised a good one. I started noticing things around 2021. The first time my son called asking about money, I didn't think much of it. He said they were doing some renovations on their condo in Toronto, unexpected costs. Could I lend him $3,000 just to bridge the gap till his bonus came in? Of course, I said. Of course. I transferred it through Interact the same afternoon. He was my son. Ray had just been gone 2 years, and I was still in that fog where nothing feels quite real, and helping my son felt like the one concrete thing I could do. The bonus came in, apparently. He never mentioned the money again. I told myself I'd misremembered. Maybe he'd paid it back and I'd forgotten. I was still grieving. I let it go. The second time was March 2022. They were planning a trip to visit my daughter-in-law's family in Portugal. Her parents' anniversary, a big milestone. The whole extended family was going. He called on a Tuesday evening, chatty at first, us asking how I was, how the garden was looking, whether I'd gotten my booster yet. Then, gently, almost carefully, they were a bit short just for the flights. Would I be able to help out? It would only be a few weeks before he could pay it back. $4,200. I said yes. I said it before I'd even really thought about it. That's the thing about being a mother. The yes comes before the thinking does. The trip looked beautiful on Instagram. My daughter-in-law posted photos of the Algarve coast, the cliffs above the water, a long dinner table set under string lights in a courtyard. They looked happy and sun-warmed and utterly at ease. There was a video of my son laughing at something her father said. He looked wonderful. He did not pay it back in a few weeks. I have a small green notebook I keep in the kitchen drawer, next to the takeout menus and the good scissors. I started writing things down, not because I distrusted my son. I want to be clear about that. I started writing things down because I'd noticed my memory doing things I didn't fully trust since Ray died, little gaps and slippages, and my doctor had told me to keep track of things that worried me. So I did. What I ended up tracking without entirely meaning to was this: March 2022, $4,200. Portugal flights, they needed a bridge loan. September 2022, $800. Car repair, apparently the transmission on her SUV had gone. He'd pay me back by Christmas. February 2023, $2,500. Property tax shortfall. They'd miscalculated what they owed on the condo. He said the accountant had made an error. June, $100. Me too. A work event he had to attend in Vancouver. Last minute, his expense account reimbursements were delayed. October 2023, $3,600. He didn't give me a reason for this one. Exactly. He said things were tight and he was embarrassed to get into specifics. I didn't push. I thought of him learning to skate on that pond, falling down, getting back up, and I transferred the money. That's just over $13,000 in 2.5 years, not counting the first $3,000 in $20,000. From a retired nurse living on a pension and whatever Ray left behind, which wasn't nothing, but also wasn't endless. I'm not a wealthy woman. I'm comfortable. I was comfortable. I had my pension from the hospital, CPP, Ray's small life insurance policy, and the house, which is paid off. I had savings I'd been careful with for 30 years, money I'd meant to use for travel one day, or to fix the roof properly, or to just have, the way you have a coat you never wear but feel better knowing is in the closet. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister in Timmins, not my friend from the ward who I still meet for coffee on Thursdays. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't ready to hear what they'd say, and because part of me believed, genuinely believed, that it was temporary, that my son was going through something, a rough patch, a transition, and that eventually it would right itself and we'd never have to speak of it directly. The call that changed things came on a Friday in January this year. He called mid-morning, which was unusual. He was normally at work by 9. He sounded bright, warm, in a good mood, and he asked how I was doing with this particular kind of attentiveness that I now understand in retrospect was a setup. He asked about my knee, which had been giving me trouble. He asked if I'd watched the hockey game the night before. Then casually, the way you'd mentioned stopping for gas on the way home, he told me they were having a dinner. His wife's parents were coming up from Oakville for a few days, and her brother was flying in from Vancouver, a proper family reunion kind of thing, and they'd reserved a private room at a restaurant in Yorkville. A nice place. He named it. I'd heard of it. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices because the prices are not really the point. He said he'd love for me to come. I felt something open up in my chest when he said that. I know that's a small thing to admit, but Ray has been gone nearly 5 years now, and my son doesn't invite me to things often. His wife's family is close and busy, and I have always felt slightly to the side of their life together, like a satellite that orbits at a respectful distance. So when he said he'd love for me to come, I felt genuinely glad. I told him, of course, I'd be there. What time should I arrive? Should I bring something? He said, just yourself, Mom, just come. I told my friend about it on Thursday. She said it was good, that it was exactly what I needed, a proper dinner with family. I went and bought a new blouse, burgundy, with small buttons at the cuff. I hadn't bought new clothes in almost a year. 2 days before the dinner on a Wednesday evening, he called again. He said he was so sorry. He should have thought of this earlier, but his mother-in-law had mentioned that she found large gatherings a bit overwhelming lately. She'd been dealing with some health things, and they'd collectively decided to keep the dinner smaller and more intimate, just the immediate family on her side. He hoped I understood. He said we'd reschedule, just the 3 of us, maybe the following week. I said, of course. I said I understood completely. I said to give his mother-in-law my best. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Ray's chair was across from me, empty as it always is now. The burgundy blouse was still in the bag from the store, hanging on the back of the bedroom door. Something felt wrong. I couldn't have told you exactly what, but something did. On Saturday evening, the night of the dinner, I drove to the pharmacy on La Salle to pick up a prescription. That's the honest reason I was out. I wasn't following anyone. I wasn't checking up. I was going to the pharmacy because my knee prescription needed renewing and I'd put it off all week. The restaurant he'd named was on my way home. I almost didn't look. I was at a red light, my hands on the wheel, and I thought about just keeping my eyes on the road and going home and making tea and watching something forgettable on television. I looked. Through the front window of the restaurant, I could see into the main dining room. There was a large table set near the back, maybe 12 people, lit warmly by the overhead light. I could see my son. I could see my daughter-in-law beside him, her hair up, wearing the kind of dress that requires advanced planning. I could see her parents, her brother, aunts or cousins, people I recognized vaguely from the wedding, people I had sat across from and made conversation with years ago. The table was full. There was no empty seat. There had never been an empty seat. I drove home. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I just drove home and put the pharmacy bag on the counter and stood at the kitchen sink, looking at the backyard for a while. The pond was frozen. It gets dark early here in January. I opened the kitchen drawer and took out the green notebook. I sat down and I read everything I'd written, all of it from the beginning, the dates, the amounts, the reasons given, the promises made. And then I thought about the dinner, about being told it was canceled, about the table with 12 people and no space where I might have sat. My son earns good money. I know this because he told me so on more than one occasion. He told me about his RSPs, about the bonus structure at his company, about the fact that they'd paid off a significant chunk of the condo. He'd said this to me, used these exact things as evidence that they were doing fine, were getting back on their feet, were almost through the rough patch. I am a retired nurse. I live on a pension. I am 65 years old, and I have given my son $16,000 in 3 years that he has never once mentioned repaying. I picked up the phone and I called my bank, not to report fraud. Not yet. I want to be clear about the order of things. I called and I asked to speak with someone about my accounts. I told them I was a senior on a fixed income and I had some concerns about some transfers I had made, and I wanted to understand what my options were and whether there was anything I should know about protecting myself going forward. The woman I spoke to was patient and thorough. She walked me through everything. She explained that transfers I'd made voluntarily were my own responsibility, but that if I felt I had been the subject of financial manipulation or elder financial abuse, there were avenues available to me. She used that phrase, elder financial abuse. I wrote it in the green notebook. She also mentioned, almost incidentally, that my son was listed as a secondary contact on one of my accounts, a holdover from when Ray died and we'd needed to sort out the estate together. That authorization, she explained, gave him limited visibility into my account balances. He could see how much I had. He'd always been able to see how much I had. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I called my sister. I sat on the back porch with my coffee and I told her everything, all of it, start to finish. She went very quiet the way she does when she is working very hard not to say something that will make things worse. Then she said very carefully, "Wanda, what do you want to do?" I thought about that for a long time. I had a meeting with a lawyer that week. Not to sue my son, not to blow anything up, just to understand where I stood. The lawyer, a woman about my daughter-in-law's age, was practical and kind. She explained that under Canadian law, gifts and informal family loans exist in a complicated gray area, especially without written documentation. However, she said, the circumstances I was describing, the consistent pattern of requests, the access to my account information, the framing of gifts as loans could potentially constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable person. She said that word, vulnerable. I didn't like it, but I wrote it down anyway. She also helped me write a letter, not a legal letter. A personal one, 3 pages, single-spaced because there was a lot to say. I listed every transfer with the date, the amount, and the reason I'd been given. I described the dinner, the call telling me it was canceled, the table with 12 people and no empty chair. I told my son that I loved him, that I had loved him since before I could fully articulate what love meant, since they put him in my arms in that hospital room in 1986, and I looked at him and understood that I would do essentially anything for this person. I told him that loving someone doesn't mean having no limits, that Ray worked 30 years building and fixing and maintaining things so that we would have something left over, something to live on, something to pass on one day, that what had happened to that money over the past 3 years was not what either of us intended. I told him I was removing him from my accounts. I told him I would not be lending any further money, under any circumstances, to anyone for any reason, regardless of how it was framed, and I told him that the dinner, being told it was canceled, then seeing it wasn't, had hurt me in a way I was still trying to understand, not because I needed to be at every gathering. I don't, but because I'd been deliberately managed and set aside, and I was old enough and had been through enough to recognize the difference between someone being thoughtful on my behalf and someone finding me inconvenient. I sent the letter on a Thursday. I gave it a week. He called on the following Wednesday. He didn't start by apologizing. That came later. First, he seemed to want to understand how I'd found out about the dinner, as if the finding out were the problem. I let him talk for a while. Then I said it doesn't really matter how I found out. What matters is that I wasn't invited, and then I was told it was canceled, and those are 2 separate things, and one of them is a lie. He went quiet. Then he said he was sorry. And he said it the way he used to say it as a boy when he'd done something he genuinely regretted, not deflecting, not explaining, just sorry, Mom, I'm sorry. He said he'd been ashamed about the money and the shame had made him do things he wasn't proud of, that his wife's family had expectations he'd been trying to meet without being honest about the cost of it, that he'd told himself he would pay me back and kept not doing it, and the longer it went, the harder it became to face. I believe him. I don't know if that's naive, but I believe that he is ashamed and that the shame compounded into something he couldn't find his way out of honestly. I told him I needed time. We are talking again carefully. He has set up an automatic transfer, $200 a month. which means it will take a long time to pay back $16,000. I know that. But it's something. It is the difference between a debt acknowledged and a gift taken. My daughter-in-law called separately, a week after my son. She apologized for the dinner. She said it had been her idea to limit the guest list, and she'd let my son handle the explanation, which she now understood had not been handled honestly. She said she was sorry. I haven't returned to that restaurant. I may not for a while. But I took the burgundy blouse out of the bag last week. I wore it to my friend's birthday lunch at the Italian place on Notre Dame. She said it suited me, the color. She said I looked like myself again. The green notebook is still in the kitchen drawer. I don't know when I'll stop needing it. Maybe never. Maybe the fact of writing things down is itself the habit now, the careful attention to what's real and what I'm being told, and whether those two things match. Ray always said I had good instincts but was too quick to ignore them when someone I loved was involved. He wasn't wrong. I'm still here in the house he built. The pond is thawed now and there are geese coming through again, the same 3 pairs that come every spring and take over the far edge like they own it. I watch them from the kitchen window while my coffee goes cold. I'm 65 years old. I gave 31 years to the night shifts and the hard calls and the work that takes something out of you. I have a paid-off house and a green notebook and a burgundy blouse that I've now worn twice. That's enough. That is more than enough. And anyone who needs me to believe otherwise is going to have to reckon with the fact that I finally figured out how to keep my own records.